Hey y'all. Today's today's objective is solving equations with square roots and cubed roots. We've had a whole unit on solving equations, and then we did equations with fractions and decimals, and so now we're going to do equations with square roots and cube roots. Remember to isolate the variable on one side of the equal sign, and to do that you're going to use the inverse. The whole goal is to get x by itself, nothing else, just x, or whatever variable. A couple of key things. Square roots have two answers, a positive and a negative. Way back when we did square roots, we talked about how there's a positive root and a negative root. Cube roots have only one negative. So a cube root has only one answer. It's either positive or negative. A square root has two answers, a positive and a negative answer. So we're going to be working with those today. Alright, so here are some examples. Example 1, the square root of x equals 10. Well, we don't have x by itself. We have the square root of x. So what is the inverse of the square root? How do we undo a square root? Then we have to square it. So watch me. You're going to put parentheses on both sides, and we're going to square both sides, because a square root and a square are inverse operations of each other. The square root and the square are going to inverse and cancel each other out, and that leaves us with x. And then 10 squared is one of those that you should know. It means 10 times 10, and 10 times 10 is 100. Now this doesn't have two answers because we didn't take the square root. We squared both sides. We squared both sides. Questions? If you have a question, write it down your spiral. Number 2, we have the square root of x plus 1 equals 4. Now, do you see how everything is under the radical? The x plus 1 is all under the radical. It's all under that square root symbol. So the only way to undo a square root is same thing. We have to square both sides. So do that on your paper, put parentheses around it, and square both sides. The square root and the square are going to cancel out, and we're left with x plus 1. And 4 squared is 16. Now, we still don't have x by itself. We have to get rid of this plus 1, which means we have to minus 1 on both sides, and x equals 15. And that is why we had to, then that is how you had to square both sides, and then we had to get rid of that plus 1. We couldn't do anything about the plus 1 because it was inside the radical. If it hadn't been inside the radical, then we could have gotten rid of that first. Alright, so number 3 has the square root of x minus 2 equals negative 1. Now notice in this one it's different. The minus 2 is not in the square root. So we have to undo that minus 2 by adding 2 to both sides. And then we get the square root of x, negative 1 plus 2 is 1. We undo a square root by squaring, and x equals 1. And then if you wanted to check, you substitute that back in. So the square root of 1, what's the square root of 1 is 1, and 1 minus 2 is negative 1. And that's how it checks out. You can check every equation. You substitute what's 15 plus 1 is 16. Square root of 16 is 4, and then you type in 100. The square root of 100 is 10. So you can check every single equation. Alright, so here are a few more examples. Number 4 is different. Notice I don't have a square root in my problem. I have an x squared. So we're going to do it a little differently. I'm going to undo the minus 9 with plus 9 on both sides, and 16 plus 9 is 25. Now I have x squared equals 25, but I don't want x squared. I want x by itself. So what is the inverse operation of x squared? The inverse of operation of a square is called a square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Do that on your paper. You're going to take the square root. The square root and the square cancel each other out, leaving me with x. And the square root of 25, this is when it has two answers. What is the square root of 25? It's either 5 or negative 5. So that is the time when you would have two answers, when you take the square root and you would have 5 and negative 5. Got it? If you have a question, write it down. Make sure you write your question down. You try number 5. You're going to model it exactly like I did on number 4. I modeled it for you. First, you're going to undo this plus 7, and then you're going to undo the square root. So pause it, and then when you're ready to see the answer, press play. So I did minus 7, minus 7. Now I have x squared equals 36. I've got to take the square root of both sides, and x could either be 6 or negative 6. If you want to check your answer, you take this and you substitute it back in. So 6 squared plus 7 or negative 6 squared plus 7. But either one you type in would give you the correct answer. So next let's do some examples with cubes. We've done some examples with square roots and squares, so now let's focus on cubes. I gave you a chart earlier with all the cubes of 1 through 10, so those are something that you might want to consider memorizing or at least refer back to. Number 6, the cubed root of x is equal to 3. So how do we undo the cubed root? The inverse of cubed root is to cube a number. So we put our parentheses around, and we're going to cube a number. The cubed root and the cube are going to cancel out. Cubed root and cube cancel, and 3 to the cube, 3 to the cube, 3 to the third power means 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. So x equals 27. Example number 7. The cubed root of x minus 1 equals 4. Cubed root of x minus 1 equals 4. So I've already shown you the first step. Because this is not inside, we can go ahead and undo minus 1 with plus 1. So we did plus 1 on both sides. I brought this down. Cubed root of x equals 5. But I don't want the cubed root. I want the just x. So I'm going to cube both sides. The cubed root and the cube cancel, and I'm left with x. 5 cubed means 5 times 5 times 5. You have it in your chart, but just in case you've forgotten, 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. So 2 examples with a cubed root. Cubed root. All right, so example 8. X cubed minus 9 equals 207. This time I don't have a cubed root, I have x cubed. So I'm going to undo my minus 9 with plus 9 on both sides. I did plus 9 plus 9. 207 plus 9 is 216. I have x cubed equals 216. That means there are 3 numbers that when you multiply, there are 3 identical numbers. So x times x times x equals 216. So in order to undo an x cubed, we have to take the cubed root. So it looks like this. Take the cubed root on both sides. The cubed root and the cube are going to cancel out. And now this is when you have to go back and look at that chart, or you have to have that memorized. What is the cubed root of 216? And I think it's 6, because 125 would be 5, and 7 cubed is like 343. So I think it's 6. And it has to be positive, because remember, cubed roots only have one answer. It has to be positive. All right, number 9, you try x cubed plus 10 equals 2. So I want you to copy this down, press pause, and then when you're ready to see the explanation, restart the video. First thing I'm going to do is subtract 10 on both sides. 2 minus 10 is negative 8, because you have to touch twice. And now I have x cubed, so I'm going to take the cubed root. The cubed root of x cubed is x. And this is where it can get tricky. What did you get for the cubed root of negative 8? Because remember, a cubed root of a negative 8 is going to be a negative 2. And then negative 2 typed into negative 2 cubed is negative 8, and negative 8 plus 10 is positive 2. So that checks out. So we will work more with cubes and cube roots tomorrow.